Yes, I did actually. She's a practical person. She's a down-to-earth person. She's very, very smart, very astute, and she knows her craft.
It was meant to be a triumph of science fiction cinema, a visual marvel, a bold narrative experiment. Instead, it became the one project Harrison Ford would quietly carry as a burden. Blade Runner, with all its cinematic innovation and unforgettable aesthetic, brought with it an undercurrent of tension and regret that would shape Ford's reflections for years. Despite being hailed as a masterpiece by critics and fans alike, Ford has never warmed to the experience. And at the center of his discomfort lies a working relationship with co-star Sean Young that nearly unraveled the entire production. What really happened during the making of this 1982 classic? Why does Ford speak about it with such detachment, even today? And what emotional toll did it take on both of its leads? Before stepping into the futuristic gloom of Ridley Scott's dystopian Los Angeles, Harrison Ford was already an unlikely star. He hadn't grown up in the spotlight or been handed opportunity by industry connections. His early years were defined by manual labor and steady carpentry work. Acting was almost a fluke, something he approached with caution rather than ambition. Ford often described himself as a late bloomer, someone who had no romantic illusions about fame. He didn't chase celebrity. He earned it slowly and skeptically. His role as Han Solo in the original Star Wars trilogy catapulted him to international recognition. The character, a smug, cynical space smuggler with a rogue charm, cemented Ford's presence in pop culture. But while audiences adored him, Ford himself bristled at being typecast. Science fiction for him was limiting. He wanted dramatic, character-driven stories that would allow him to explore depth rather than deliver one-liners between action sequences. Yet Hollywood kept offering him variations of the same archetype, tough, emotionally withdrawn men in extraordinary settings. Indiana Jones was the next evolution in that mold. With Raiders of the Lost Ark, Ford proved he could carry a blockbuster without the trappings of outer space. It was a global hit, and he could have comfortably coasted through sequels. But in 1981, he surprised many by agreeing to take on a completely different project, one that was dark, philosophical, and stylistically detached from the kinetic energy of his previous work. Blade Runner was a noir-infused, intellectually demanding script helmed by Ridley Scott, whose recent success with Alien had established him as a visionary. But the script was dense, the characters opaque, and the tone emotionally distant. Ford admitted from the start that he didn't much care for the screenplay. He thought the narration was clumsy and his character, Rick Deckard, a burnt-out ex-cop assigned to hunt down rogue androids, felt underwritten, but he signed on nonetheless. Many speculated about his reasons. Some believed he wanted artistic credibility, something beyond the commercial appeal of Star Wars. Others assumed he was drawn to Ridley Scott's visual storytelling. Whatever his motive, Ford took the role, and almost immediately the experience began to sour. From the earliest stages, Ford had an uneasy sense about the production. The film was going to be grueling, not just because of the long hours and intense physical demands, but because of the dynamic he anticipated with his co-star, a young actress named Sean Young. She was spirited, unconventional, and unwilling to cater to anyone's ego, least of all Ford's. From the outset, their personalities seemed destined to clash. Ford was no stranger to strong-willed collaborators. He had publicly sparred with George Lucas over rigid dialogue in Star Wars, and he had endured the chaotic pace of the Indiana Jones films. But Blade Runner was different. It was moody, emotionally suffocating, and drenched in a tone of despair. Worse yet, there was no chemistry between him and Young. Not on set, not off camera, and certainly not in the scenes meant to portray romance. He would later call the production one of the most joyless of his career, a set devoid of warmth, where even basic collaboration felt strained. And Sean Young, who was still fairly new to Hollywood, arrived not just with her lines, but with a fierce determination to be taken seriously. That fire, while admirable, often clashed with Ford's stoic reserve. Sean Young was poised for stardom when she landed the role of Rachel, the enigmatic replicant who slowly begins to question her own identity. She wasn't just cast for her looks. Although she had a striking, almost timeless beauty, she brought a cerebral quality, a kind of vulnerability that was crucial to the role. Half of it was visual, a haunting presence that drew you in. The other half was pure commitment. Her screen test had impressed Ridley Scott, who saw, in her eyes, a perfect balance of emotional detachment and buried fragility. Rachel needed to be more than a love interest. She had to feel manufactured, yet fully human, confident yet fragile. It was a massive ask for any actor, let alone someone still building their career. But Young threw herself into it, and she wasn't about to let the opportunity pass quietly. Where Ford was reserved and economical, Young was expressive and deeply involved. She wanted to explore character motivations, analyze the emotional layers of every scene, and engage her scene partners. Ford, on the other hand, preferred silence between takes, saving his energy for what the camera needed. He didn't rehearse much. He didn't linger on set. Their opposing methods quickly built a wall between them. Caught in the middle of this emotional divide was Ridley Scott. The director had enough on his plate. Constant rain machines, thick smoke effects, and complex lighting setups made each day a logistical nightmare. The atmosphere was physically draining, emotionally cold, and increasingly tense. While the film looked stunning, the people making it were barely holding together. The tension between Ford and Young wasn't explosive. It didn't boil over into shouting matches, but it simmered under the surface. Ford later called the experience miserable, while Young said she often felt isolated, even ganged up on. She believed some crew members quietly sided with Ford, making her feel like an outsider despite being a lead. The emotional toll of that disconnection would become especially apparent when the film's most disturbing scene came into focus. There's a moment in Blade Runner that still unsettles audiences decades later. It's the scene where Deckard corners Rachel, blocks her exit, and commands her to declare affection for him. It's stylized as a noir romance, but many viewers interpret it as deeply coercive. And behind the scenes, it was just as fraught. That scene wasn't in the script in its final form. It evolved on set, largely due to Ridley Scott's desire to inject ambiguity and intensity into their relationship. But what emerged instead was a scene that felt forced, even violent. For Young, filming it was traumatic. There was no intimacy coordinator, no emotional check-ins, things that are now standard on professional sets. It was coldly executed, with minimal takes and little discussion. Young later described the experience as miserable and deeply upsetting. She felt vulnerable and unsupported, like a prop rather than a performer. Ford never said much publicly about the scene, but in later interviews, he admitted that it had been a bad experience for everyone involved. He didn't elaborate, but his discomfort was evident. This moment cemented the emotional chasm between the two actors. Young found Ford cold and distant. Ford saw Young as unpredictable and hard to engage with. The scene wasn't just difficult to perform, it left a scar on both of them. They completed the film like professionals, but their relationship never recovered. There was no closure, no later reunion, no mutual admiration. Just distance. The public had no idea of the tension behind the camera when Blade Runner was released. But inside Hollywood, the whispers began. And while Ford's career continued to rise, with more Indiana Jones films, The Fugitive Witness, and others, Sean Young stalled. And much of that downturn was attributed not to her talent, but to her unwillingness to stay silent. She had spoken out. She had criticized how she was treated on set, and she refused to play the part of the grateful ingenue. In the Hollywood of the early 1980s, that was an unforgivable sin. Speaking out got her labeled as difficult. Directors hesitated. Producers whispered. Casting agents quietly removed her name from consideration. Yet Sean Young never backed down. She continued to call out the inequities she experienced from Blade Runner to later roles like Dune. She insisted on being treated with respect, and instead of being praised for her honesty, she was punished. She became the cautionary tale, the actress who was too much. While Ford's name remained clean, untarnished by the production's darker aspects, Young bore the brunt. She missed out on key roles. Auditions evaporated, and in the rare times she was cast, her presence came with caveats and raised eyebrows, all for having spoken the truth. In a desperate attempt to reclaim agency, she went public in the most extreme way during the early 90s. After being denied the role of Catwoman in Batman Returns, Young donned a homemade costume and stormed a studio meeting, demanding to be considered. The press mocked her. Executives deemed her unstable. And once again, her boldness backfired. Ford, meanwhile, was ascending into icon status. He played presidents, lawyers, cops, the epitome of strength and reason. He never had to explain his part in Blade Runner's darker side. He never had to defend his behavior. And he never once publicly stood up for Sean Young.